So, welcome back to another episode of IPHA's Interprofessional Health Talk. I'm Harneet.
And I'm Janna. Our guest today is the director of the Ethics and Health Branch of the Center for Research on Ethics in Montreal. She's also president of the International Association of Bioethics and professor at the Bioethics program at the University of Montreal. Welcome, Dr. Ravitsky. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for being here. Yeah. To start, could you walk us through what a bioethicist is?
So a bioethicist is a researcher or a practitioner who studies the ethical, legal, societal, policy issues that emerge from biomedicine. So anything that has to do with end-of-life decisions, beginning of life, research ethics, health policy, but mostly the ethical implications and the impact on society of these new technologies. So it's not a discipline. It's not like being a philosopher or a mathematician. It's mostly focusing on a set of questions that emerge from biomedicine.
To provide a better insight into a day in your life, you did prepare a little presentation for us.
I'll give a little bit of context. This is a presentation that I was asked to give to new students joining the university on their first day on campus. They asked a few professors to present sort of the highlights of their research to give students a sense of what is happening in academic life in terms of research. And I chose to talk about one of my main research projects. And this was in a pecha kucha format, which means that you go through slides very, very quickly based on visuals to get to your point. I'm a professor of bioethics at the University of Montreal. Bioethics is the field that addresses the ethical, societal, legal, and political issues that emerge from biomedical practice and research. And I'd like to tell you about one of my research projects. But to get us into the topic, I'll start with a personal story. I became pregnant at the age of 40, which is considered advanced maternal age. That's a polite way of saying that I was very old. It was an extremely desired pregnancy. Like most Canadian women, I was screened to find out the risk of Down syndrome or trisomy 21, and the result was high risk. So 1 in 40 chance, they told me, that my fetus had this third chromosome that indicated intellectual deficits, developmental delay, and possibly other medical problems. I found it particularly difficult to believe that our child might never be independent, but it was just a risk. We wanted to know for sure. To know for sure, I had to undergo an invasive test, amniocentesis. A needle would be inserted into my uterus to obtain fetal DNA. It's not fun, and it implies a risk of miscarriage, the possible loss of this very desired pregnancy. I wanted to know for sure, but I decided not to do it and to be happy with the baby no matter what. Yet, the next few months were filled with anxiety. I was left with many questions. How is it that after 40 years of prenatal testing, we still haven't found a way to give more certain answers without risking the pregnancy? Why do pregnant women still face this dilemma? How can fetal DNA be found without invading the uterus? One day, while reading a scientific journal, I found the answer. In 1997, a researcher found fragments of fetal DNA circulating in the blood of pregnant women. Scientists then tried to use these fragments to detect trisomy 21, and finally, using advanced sequencing technologies, they succeeded. In 2011, hallelujah, the first non-invasive prenatal test that since we called NIPT became available. It had to be bought privately, and it was expensive, around $2,000 at the time. But the result was much more reliable than any other screening test and without a risk of miscarriage. So I was so enthusiastic that I spent the night writing an article that I entitled NIPT, an Ethical Imperative. I argued that this test should be offered to all pregnant women without delay as soon as it is clinically validated. But as time went on, I began to wonder, yes, I personally would have liked this test when I was pregnant, but what are the societal implications of this new technology? Will people living with Down syndrome feel that society is more concerned about preventing the birth of others like them? And indeed, recently, when the British government decided to offer public funding for NIPT, families of children with disabilities protested against this decision. They said the technology is eugenic, that it diminishes the value of their children. For them, it was not a benefit, it was a threat. On the other hand, because of the high price of NIPT, many women who would have chosen this test continue to undergo amniocentesis with the risk of miscarriage, despite the fact that a better screening test is already available. This barrier to access may be unfair. So I realized that NIPT raises societal, ethical, and economic challenges. With a pan-Canadian team, I decided to prepare a grant application. We worked hard, and in 2013, we managed to obtain $10.5 million in funding for a research project we called Pegasus. For 4 years, we studied all aspects of the implementation of NIPT in Canada. My research team was responsible for several studies. We surveyed hundreds of pregnant women, their partners, and health professionals to learn about their values, concerns, needs, and priorities. We also interviewed people to better understand their views. I'd like to present you with a small example of our results. So, for example, we asked if NIPT were offered as a routine prenatal test, what would be your level of concern regarding increased pressure on women to use it? And as you can see, the majority, except the blue, about 70% had concerns. So we prepared a website that informs the public and presents ethical reflections on the issue. We also asked, who do you think should have free access to NIPT, publicly funded? And as you can see, almost 100% of women, partners, and professionals thought that NIPT should be covered by public funds, either for all pregnant women or for those at high risk, like I had. And indeed, following the conclusion of our Pegasus project, the Quebec government decided to cover NIPT for high-risk women based on our results. This is a good example of the possible impact of research on health policy and on the lives of tens of thousands of families per year. But the challenge is not over. NIPT is now available not only for Down syndrome, but for many other conditions. So our team decided to prepare another grant application, and once again, we succeeded. We received over $12 million for Pegasus 2 that will address the expanded use of NIPT. Already today, this technology can offer whole fetal genome sequencing, which means that in the future, when today's students might have their babies, NIPT could provide an avalanche of information, basically the entire DNA of your fetus very early in the pregnancy. Pegasus 2 will play an important role in the future of these tests in Canada and may even have an impact on your generation. So from the future, I want to go back to the past. This fetus that I told you about, here she is. I introduce you to my daughter as a baby and now. And as you see, even though I was very old when I had her, I still had time to give her a little brother who adores her. I often wonder in what world they will have their children. And finally, my students sometimes ask me how to balance family life with an extremely busy research and teaching career. So as I have tried to show, one life can inspire the other. And the search for the right balance between the two, for me and for almost everybody I know, that balance is always a work in progress. Thank you.
So in a project like Pegasus, what are the different professionals that you would work with?
So Pegasus is the perfect example of what I said earlier about cross-disciplinary work. So of course we work with the geneticists who develop the technology. We work with the clinicians who offer these tests to women. We work with a variety of healthcare providers, right? From your family physician who might be the one offering it, to gynecologists, to midwives, nurses, So even if I just look at the healthcare side, there's a lot of diversity. And then we work with ethicists, sociologists. So the survey that I described, right? You need even statistics support to analyze these results, to design these tools. We do a lot of qualitative work, so interviews with various populations, families raising children with Down syndrome, healthcare providers, pregnant couples. So you need this expertise in qualitative research. Law. We work with law professors who analyze the legal implications of this technology and the policy. So at least all of those backgrounds that I just named and more.
And lastly, you kind of touched on this very briefly, but we wanted to ask you what a balanced life looks like for you.
So I'm really glad you said balanced life because the popular term work-life balance is something that I really, really dislike. To me, it sort of tells you that life starts when work ends or that you need to protect your life from your work. I love my work. It's one of the biggest and most fun parts of my life. So I never think of it in terms of work-life balance. But a balanced life is a much better framing. We go back to framing of the issue. And it's especially important for academics because we tend to not have boundaries. Most academics I know have space at home to work even before COVID. A lot of us go back to our computers after dinner. We definitely work on the weekend. It's all consuming and it never ends. Okay, you published a paper, you're already working on 3 others that come out of it. The next research question is always there. The next project, the proposals of collaborations are just flooding you all the time. So there's never a point in time where you say, I'm done for today, or for this week, or for this year. You always want to work more. And I hear this from all my colleagues. So, there are some jobs that you finished your workload for the day, you close up your office computer, you come home. This just doesn't exist in our field. So you have to find the boundaries that work for you. And I tend to be non-judgmental. I don't think that some of us work too hard. You work as much as you want to work, but you need to keep your health and especially, time for family and friends. To me, that's critical. And time to play. I recently heard a TED Talk about what helps the brain focus. And it turns out that there's a lot of research in neurology that shows that if we allow ourselves to not be stimulated for a little while, we become much more creative. So we need to disconnect for a little while so that we can have new ideas and make new connections. For me, it happens in the shower because I think that's the only place where I'm just thinking. But a balanced life is where you manage to find your own ways to disconnect from the high stimulation of the research, whether it is for fun, family, or friends, or whether it is just to create the space in your brain to come up with your next big idea.
I think that concludes the interview with you today. Would you like to add anything else?
Well, to all those who joined us, we're often told to follow our hearts. And this can be a big challenge in these trying economic times. Sometimes people wonder, should I continue with my graduate studies? Will I find use for these skills? Try to remember that when you stay in university, in any graduate program, it's not necessarily about becoming a professor or a researcher, right? The skill set that you get, even at the PhD level, can open doors in various directions. One of our brightest PhD students ended up becoming an entrepreneur and, having a startup company, not even in bioethics, but the skill set that he acquired, he still uses. So to think about academia as a stage in life that can open the door, that can open many doors in many different directions, not just training that is meant to replicate your professors are not there just to create more professors. they're there. They're there to open doors for many professions and career paths for which they're giving you a skill set. So yeah, listen to your heart as much as you can.
100%. And I love that. And you also touched on transferable skills, which I'm a huge believer of still. That kind of brings hope to anything you do never goes to waste. You can always kind of like implement that into anything else you do afterwards.
Absolutely.
Lots of hope to that. Thank you so much, Dr. Ravitsky, for being here with us and for sharing your experiences and your research and everything you've been doing, your projects nowadays. So interesting. I hope that I hope everyone tuning in learned as much as we have. It's been very, very insightful. And thank you again to anyone tuning in to another episode of Interprofessional Health Talks. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. And as always, you can find us at UOttawa IPHA on our socials. Have a great week.